Hello, hello there. My name is Murray. I'm with my co-host Corey, and we are The Real Guys. This is Siren Radio, and this is The Real Show with two E's. The music you just heard, Easy Way Out, by Robert Tepper from Rocky IV in 1985. We have got a packed show for you today for our broadcast. As always, I'm accompanied by my co-host Corey. How are you doing today, Corey?
Doing very well, thank you.
Good, good. It's good to hear you. Today is a very special day for us, however, as we have a guest with us today. Now, editor, sound editor, producer, programme leader and lecturer at the University of Lincoln, having worked for the BBC television stations in drama, music, science and documentary, and experience in film and television sound design. We have a very special guest today. We are pleased and honoured to welcome Mr. Chris Hainstock.
Hello, great to be here.
Thank you.
What a build-up. Never quite had a build-up like that. Very nice to be in this virtual studio. You've got a great place you've got here.
Thank you very much, Chris. Well, we're very pleased and very honoured, as I said, to have you on today and to share some of your great wisdom from the filmmaking industry.
I'll do my best.
Thank you very much. So, to start off this interview and discussion, do you want to let the listener know how did you get started in the industry? When did you start from?
Okay, so that's the kind of question that I thought you might be asking, and it's the one that I'm kind of. There isn't an easy answer to it, but there's a kind of slightly long version, if you like. I'll have a go at that.
Okay.
I mean, okay. So the short version is that I did a degree, and in that degree, it was actually a graphic design degree. But after about the first year, I wasn't particularly happy with the way that it was kind of panning out. I thought it was a bit too restricted for me. And then I noticed that there was a film course on the floor above where I was working. And I asked around and met a few people who were working there. And it turned out that I could actually continue doing my graphic design course, but I could switch to making films for my second and third year. Now, this is back in 1982.
Right.
And it was amazing. And I basically, we were shooting 16mm film. We had some very, very rudimentary video and video editing. And the person who was in charge of that was a man called Adrian York. And there were a couple of other very influential people working there as well, or very inspirational. Sorry, that's probably the better word. And they just basically sort of nourished this kind of real interest in making films and editing, particularly, and things like animation. And we did drama, we did live action, and we only had a limited amount of film to work on. So that sort of induced a kind of sense of being very careful about what you did film.
Yeah.
There was also quite a big music scene going on in Leeds where I was. And so we made kind of, in inverted commas, this new thing called a music video, which really had just started. And we shot some music videos on film and then transferred them. And we also shot a few on video as well. But of course, all video editing was linear editing in those days, which means recording from one machine to another. Anyway, so we made lots of films, and it was great, and I really, really enjoyed it. And then during my 3 years, there was a film that was being shot at my girlfriend's parents' house by the BBC, the 6-part drama. And when I was watching them filming, it was really fascinating, and I got chatting to the crew and everything, and that kind of fueled a real desire as well to kind of get to work in TV. And I think from a very early age, I'd always wanted to work for the BBC. I don't quite know why, but I think it boils down to being fascinated by. They used to have this thing which was a camera car,
right?
And the camera car was a kind of a state vehicle with a huge television camera on the top, which was really used for horse racing, I think, and any kind of
Mhm.
mobile shooting that was needed. And I think there was a model. I'm fairly sure there was a dinky toy model that you could get, which was a BBC camera car in the classic BBC green livery with the sort of angled BBC logo lozenge on the side.
Yeah.
And I had one of those. And of course, I used to watch Blue Peter a lot, which was live in those days. And that kind of instilled this kind of notion that there was this place called Television Centre in London,
Yeah.
this mystical place.
Yeah.
So I thought, well, that's that's something to aim for, but I had no idea. I had no idea what I was going to do. And then towards the end of my 3 years, that horrible phase that all students will recognise when they had to work out what they're going to do next. I managed to have a chat to the external examiner that came to look at our work, and he sort of said, look, you ought to contact the BBC and see if there's any short-term contract work going there. And he made it seem so kind of possible. To me, it was at least I was led to believe that it wouldn't be too difficult as long as I could find somewhere to live. And I guess the sort of arrogance of youth meant that I kind of just thought, oh, well, I'll find somewhere. So, and in those days, most media jobs, you used to buy The Guardian. I think it was on a Monday, and there would be media jobs on a Monday. And one week I bought a copy of The Guardian, and there was an advert for trainee assistant film editors, it was called. And it would be a 6-month job. And I applied for that, but I didn't get an interview. And that's kind of, a lot of people are used to kind of knockbacks and things like that. It didn't really bother me that much at the time. But they contacted me and said, would you like to apply for this job? And it was a 6-month contract job working in the film library in West London for the BBC. The BBC had its own massive archive library.
Yeah.
And so I went to work there. And after 6 months, I found something else, another 3-month job. And then I eventually found out about this trainee assistant film editor scheme, which I could apply for. Meanwhile, I think I'd already started working at Ealing Studios, the BBC's Ealing Studios. I'd managed to get kind of contract work as an assistant film editor. It's all a bit blurry now, as you can imagine, back in the 80s. But essentially, I ended up working as an assistant film editor quite early on, without having to go through the trainee scheme, which the BBC ran. And there's a lot to be said about how that all happened. But the bottom line was, I was, by 1986, end of 1986, I was working in this amazing fiction factory. Well, they made documentaries as well. So it was the film department of the BBC based at the historic Ealing Film Studios. And it was just the most amazing thing ever.
Wow. It's quite the journey, to be honest. It's interesting, again, how you say that when you get to this point, when you're at the end of your third year in your studies, you just get to the point where you're at the cliff face and you're like, what exactly do I do? What do I jump off into doing? So transitioning into the BBC is quite a thing to do, isn't it, Corey?
I mean, yeah, it's quite a big thing. And like you said, I think a lot of people have either thought about it or want to do it. However, there is something I want to ask, which I'm sure the viewers and the listeners are wanting to know. It's a very big and important question.
Is it a hot take?
Yeah, exactly. It's a very big question we ask around here, starting with the big hitters. So, and this could be any time. It could be 80s, 90s, recent, it doesn't matter. But let's say, theoretically, right now you're sat down, you're editing something, right? You got a full day of editing. what is, if any, what's your snack of choice to get you through the day?
I see. Right. So you're getting onto the important stuff quite early.
Yeah.
Okay. So, well, yes, editors do tend to need quite a lot of sustenance. That's true. I'm not going to give you an easy answer on that one. I'll tell you why. Because I think a lot of people think, especially nowadays, when people think of editing, they visualize sitting down in front of a computer and clicking a mouse. That is not when I close my eyes, that's not how I see editing. So you have to remember that certainly in the 80s and 90s, most film editing took place standing up in a film cutting room, physically manhandling or person handling heavy film, winding it through machines, lifting and carrying heavy boxes. It was really, really physically demanding job. We used to stand up all the time, apart from occasionally when we'd sit down on what's called a flat plate Steenbeck machine and watch our cuts or something, or have a viewing. And so it was very much it really was like working in a factory. It just happened to be an entertainment factory. And there were 3 floors of cutting rooms. Let's say there's 12 cutting rooms on each floor, and sort of 3 or 4 sound stages next door as well. So there's always 2 or 3 things being shot every day, plus hundreds of camera cars around the back with crews going off every day shooting anything you could possibly imagine. So anyway, it's a very physical job. And there was also a sort of regimented approach to the working day. You get there for 7:30. You'd get a sort of, some people would have a cooked breakfast, because I think the canteen was open from about 6:30 for the camera crews. And then you just work your way through. Now, if you're an assistant editor, you would usually be assigned to an editor for a long time. I'm talking a year, 18 months, 3 years sometimes. And that editor, whoever he or she was, would have their own individual sort of pet things that they liked or whatever. And you would inevitably the coffee and the cake and whatever it would be. So I suppose what I'm saying is you burnt a lot of calories. So there was quite a lot of cake eating, I seem to remember. But I think if you're looking for, a specific item, it would have to be the banana. The banana provides the brain energy and the sugar that's needed for the concentration. But I'll put a little caveat to this whole thing about cake. If you're thinking about cake or biscuit, for my entire working life, I didn't realize it, but I was actually gluten intolerant, and it only came to light when I moved to the university here, actually, and someone recommended that I try cutting it out. But most of my working life, I've realized now that eating cake and biscuits and pasta and pizzas and everything used to make me, ill and kind of dizzy and tired and stuff like that. So it's a bit like cake is evil now, in unless it's gluten free. So either my snack of choice would be a banana or a gluten free cake. How about that?
Nice.
Oh wow! Is that enough, Corey?
Yeah, it's a lot of fruit in the film industry.
Yeah, everyone was on about fruit. Our last guest, Jack Shelbourne, if you can remember, Corey, had a beautiful
easy peel oranges.
Yeah, had a beautiful description of easy peel oranges. So
I think it's all about accessibility. I imagine if you're on location, the food has got to be portable, accessible, and quick. So bananas, oranges, apples. I can see grapes. I can see how it's all coming together now. Yeah.
Yeah.
Certainly, what you don't want is kind of melted chocolate bar all over your equipment or your hands.
No, nothing that's like crumbly that will like get everywhere in your machines or whatever.
By the way, this is not how the conversation in my mind was going to go, I have to say.
Oh, that's all Corey's fault. All Corey's fault. He just goes on about snacks all day.
Right, food, man, it's important. It's an important
thing.
Food
is important. I'll give you that. Yeah. Well, he always likes to ask that. He asked that to Jack. He asked that to me. He goes, "Oh, what's your favourite snacks?" He's always on with the snacks. But back to business, Chris. I've got to ask you, what's your biggest project? Come on, what's the biggest you've worked on?
Yeah, that's a difficult one as well, because some programs are really, really hard work and take up a lot of your time, and you sort of maybe hate them for a while, and then afterwards, and sometimes years later, you look back and say, well, that was amazing. Really hard to pick out one thing. I think there's sort of highlights along the way. So quite early on in my career, I worked on a drama called Tumbledown, which was about the Falklands, starring Colin Firth, and it was directed by Richard Eyre, who went on to be the director of the National Theatre. And what struck me was how passionate Richard Eyre was about the story. It was a true story about a member of the Irish Guards called Robert Lawrence, who was shot and wounded on Mount Tumbledown during the Falklands War in the early 80s, but survived. And I met him, Robert Lawrence, and it was a very powerful story. It's an anti-war story in many ways, and it was part of a series that the BBC used to make called Screen 2, which essentially was a 90-minute drama, a sort of feature-length drama that they made about 15 of them a year. And it was shot on either 35, if the budget was high enough, or Super 16 mil. Anyway, so I was working on that as a very, very young age, and it had a very powerful on me. I did all the sound design as well as being an assistant editor on it. But the editor was Ken Pearce, who is a legendary film editor, hugely influential, and he gave me a break as well. So I've got a lot of affection for working on Tumbledown. And then as editor, I think probably working on a couple of things, working on Jonathan Creek, which was a really interesting series, a sort of hybrid series written by David Renwick, but shot on film. And that sticks in my mind because not only was it shot on film, but we edited it on a non-linear system called Lightworks, which was it's still around today actually, but it's kind of and Lightworks days in the 80s. And also lots of documentary series that I've worked on, which have a real sort of public service ethos behind them. So some quite harrowing documentaries about, medicine and kind of people being treated and all of that kind of thing. Very intricate editing, lots of complex sequences to cut and difficult sequences, but hugely rewarding. But, the list, honestly, I couldn't, if I really thought about it, come to me that maybe one thing, but it's usually the pivotal moments in your career that stick out. So working on a documentary with Prince Charles probably was quite a highlight, just because it was so bizarre.
Yeah.
He would come in quite a few times to the cutting room.
How did that go?
It went really well. I mean, it was. So if you just rewind slightly, I'm working away at Ealing Studios as a young 20-year-old, and just enjoying working on all sorts of different programs. And then I get a phone call from the sort of editing allocations people saying, do you want to go and work on a documentary? I don't know if they said about Prince Charles or with Prince Charles. And for some reason I was very sort of snobbish in the sense that I thought drama was the thing to be in. And I kind of said, I'm not so sure about that. This was on a Friday.
Yeah.
On the Monday, I kind of quickly realized, what are you thinking? So I went to work on this doc. The editor was a guy called Jeff Shaw, and I was the assistant editor and the dubbing editor. So I did all the sound work as well. And we cut it at Lime Grove, which has now been demolished, big BBC building in West London, on the top floor. And Prince Charles wrote and presented this documentary, which was shot around the world, way ahead of its time in many ways. But he was following in his own father's footsteps. So Prince Philip before him was really sort of into the environment and looking after the planet and all of that kind of thing. And so that's where Charles got it from. And it was a working day. So he would come to the cutting room, not for very long, maybe about 6 times he came. There was a producer as well. But it was really interesting because I didn't really call him Your Highness or Sir or anything like that. I just kind of got on with my job. And I remember getting tea and coffee and stuff, and there was always a guard outside that. But my favorite story about that is the producer was quite a sort of sycophantic, if you know what I mean. He kind of would be a bit. If you know the character Basil Fawlty from the Fawlty Towers.
Oh dear, yeah.
There's a bit of a Basil Fawlty, kind of. So in awe of royalty, I would say, to an extent, but rightly so in some ways. He had a lot of respect. And I got sent off to get teas and coffees and stuff, and came back with the classic BBC branded, I think it was polystyrene cups.
Oh, right.
And, in a film tin. We used to use film tin lids to carry teas in. So I had these maybe about five teas, one for me, one for Prince Charles, one for the producer, one for the editor, and one for his equerry. I think the Prince Charles's equerry was there as well.
Right.
In a tiny cutting room, and God knows how we all.
Is that like his assistant?
Yeah, his kind of personal assistant. Really.
Right. Okay.
And the producer said, "I'm so sorry, Your Royal Highness, that it's not China." And Prince Charles said, "Oh, that's quite all right. I have drunk out of polystyrene before," which I thought was endeared himself to me. I thought that was quite funny.
That's perfect.
And the other story is that his visits were supposed to be hush hush, and they weren't formal state visits or anything like that. It's supposed to be a working visit. So we all kept stum. Nobody, apart from a few people in the sort of editing world at the BBC, knew about it. I came in early the first day he was due to come in. I think I came in at 7 just to make sure. And there was cleaners were polishing all the brass push plates on all the doors, which was a bit unusual. I never saw them doing that very often, although I'm sure they did. It was very well kept.
Yeah.
But I sort of said, morning, and this woman said, "Big day today, Prince Charles is coming." And I remember thinking, hang on a sec, this is supposed to be secret, And so then we were looking out the window, this 11th floor room on this big tall building, waiting for him to arrive. And I remember the cars arriving, stopping in the middle of the road, and a sort of unmarked car, police, big card out of the back window that just said "Police stop" to the cars behind it.
Right.
Not quite felt tip, but kind of block letters.
Yeah.
That was the sum total. Please stop. All these cars had to stop while Charles gets out and comes up. But anyway, I'm kind of making a meal out of it. But it was a really interesting experience. Let's put it that way, and a very rewarding. You don't often get a chance to sort of meet royalty, I suppose, do you? So that was
no. I don't. Well, and from looking at your wide career, it's not the only time. It's not the first time that you've worked with the royals before. You did the concert for Diana from BBC One in 2007, and you also, I believe, covered the royal wedding in 2005 from the Prince of Wales and the Duchess of Cornwall.
Yeah, so you got to get the chronology right. So the Prince Charles documentary about the environment was in the 90s.
Right.
And he was married to Diana at the time. I think they were just separating.
Mm-hmm.
And yeah, I mean, we used to do a lot of things. Like I've done a few things for the Queen's speech every now and again. And I think one year I remember projecting, before I went into editing, I was actually a projectionist at the BBC as well. And I remember projecting a copy of the speech to the Queen at Television Centre at sometime in the late 80s.
Mm-hmm.
But yeah, the concert for Diana, that was very, very special. So, obviously she passed away by then. So it's a very poignant thing to work on. And the BBC events was hugely respected and experienced, and they produced these these big events. This was on at Wembley, so it had lots of live concerts and performances, and then these kind of film inserts, and then the whole thing was broadcast as well. And that was a weird experience because there's several things really. I've never had viewings with more people in than I have when it's anything to do with Diana. I worked on a documentary about the inquest as well, and for the concert for Diana, I think there was something like 15 people in the edit suite watching the cuts. So there were people from the Palace, there were people from Live Nation, which was the company that put on the live event. There were the producers. There's always kind of a senior BBC as well, and it was, that's quite weird. But also the other weird thing was watching, because there's quite a few of us working on it, about 4 editors working on it, cutting all of this stuff, which might be stories from ordinary people who'd met Princess Diana and experiences of her, or stories about her life, or lots of different films ranging from 5 to 20 minutes long. We went to Wembley on the day as well, and watching your films being played in Wembley Stadium on big screens.
Wow.
It's quite a weird experience. And I remember thinking, I wish I'd edited them differently because of the echo and the reverb and the delay that it took people to because there were people applauding and things. I should have engineered more pauses in, because they were designed for broadcast really, ultimately.
Yeah.
So that was an interesting experience. And then much later on, when Charles married Camilla, the same events team put on the filmed the wedding and did all the sort of material that goes with a broadcast like that, so that you make a lot of films that you can play on the day and things like that. And then the next day, I think, or the Monday after, they called me in and said, "Oh, can you put together the highlights of the whole wedding for Prince Charles? And we want to make some sort of commemorative DVDs just for them." So we made this thing, which is about, I think it was 90 minutes of their wedding. Which we only made like 4 DVDs. And I've got this vision of it being on Prince Charles's shelf somewhere, our wedding.
Oh wow.
But yeah, there is a connection with the BBC and the royal family. It goes back a long, long time, and I've done quite a few royal documentaries, and I've even done the Queen's obituary and Prince Philip's obituary.
The Queen's not. The Queen's obituary.
Correct.
They don't. Well, as far as I know, I think she's perfectly healthy.
That's correct. Yeah. So what you possibly don't know is that broadcasters, but particularly the BBC, have a list of people that they want to have obituaries on ready to go. And this list
ready to go.
I know. And obviously, top of the list is the Queen. And people from the royal family. So every 5 years or so, those obituaries are updated. So I did Prince Philip's twice, and the Queen's. Yeah, and they're basically under lock and key. They contain ready full cut 90 minutes or 2 hours, plus material that can be taken out and used straight away by broadcasters.
Oh God, that sounds
it's a bizarre thing.
Yeah, it sounds surreal, almost.
Yeah, we used to do lots of sort of top celebrities as well, or famous people of any kind. There's probably something like 30 or 40 obituaries at any one time ready to go.
Oh wow, especially the royals. Yeah, I get that. Yeah, completely. Yeah,
I mean that's a lot of people. It's a lot of people. Was I correct in hearing you said you were 20 on the first with Prince Charles?
No, I was in my 20s. It was late. I was probably sort of late 20s. Yeah.
Okay. So a lot of people currently, including myself, who are maybe in their 20s, late 20s, are just starting to get out into the film world. maybe that's leaving education or uni, that sort of thing. Is there anything you would tell people who are just starting to kind of like put themselves out there? Is there anything that can help them maybe stand out as an editor, or if it's a website, a show reel, social media, that sort of thing?
It's really hard. It's a perennial issue, and we talk about it a lot, and I'm very conscious about it in terms of careers. It's really difficult sometimes to explain to perhaps people of your generation the difference when we were your age. Obviously, no internet, no social media, computers were just starting, really. And there are pros and cons of that. The pros were that you basically made your own career. You had to make your own path, and that involved writing to people, telephoning them, talking to them, going to see them, reading newspapers, and basically a kind of perhaps a slower pace, but also nobody knew what you were doing unless you told them. So you might go for an interview or something, and you might do a job, and maybe it didn't work or something. But if it went well, nobody knew about it, and if it went badly, nobody knew about it. So that it kind of works both ways, really. So you kind of forged your own little niche, really looking at everybody needs a break, and it's still true today that you need a break. You need someone to give you a break and take you on. But nowadays, we're just inundated with people telling you how they think you should, people who are advising you on how you should behave in order to get a career and things like that. And it's really difficult because obviously, let's take the media industry. Obviously, it's very large now and much bigger than it was back in my day when I started. We just had Channel 4 starting in the early 80s, I think. So there weren't that many television channels. So there's a lot more output. And so there are more vacancies, but it's much more challenging and demanding now. And there's a lot more competition because there are a lot more people who are aware of the whole mechanics of film and television making anyway. So to answer your question, what advice would I give is the best advice I can give is just to do things and not to ask people for advice that much about how they can do those things, if you know what I mean. Don't look for other people to be able to show you the way. Find your own way, make a few mistakes, but just put yourself out there, put yourself in the position where you might come into contact. You're not going to succeed by just staying in one place, almost physically staying in a room, etc. I mean, I know currently with lockdown, we're all used to being at home a lot, but you have to get out and about, and you just have to do things. And I think when you have some experience under your belt, that's the thing that's going to impress a potential employer. I mean, let's face it, you're going to be working on short-term contracts in the media and creative industries. There's no such thing now as a kind of long-term job anymore. It's kind of 3 weeks, 3 months, a year max, maybe, before it kind of gets reviewed and maybe you move on. And there are advantages being able to move around. So do things, get things done, real physical things. So if you want to get into editing, then edit people's films and do a lot of editing. And if you can't edit other people's films, then edit films that you've filmed yourself or material that you've acquired. Just gain that experience that way, and perhaps say yes to a lot of things as long as they're legal. If someone says, "Oh, can you do this?" and we need it for next week or something, you've got two choices at that point. You can either say yes or no. And generally speaking, you could follow the Jim Carrey yes man approach and just try it. And you never know. Things happen, connections happen, connections are made. If you look at people that you might be working with at university, for example, Thelma Shoemaker, who's one of the leading film editors of all time, really, she met Martin Scorsese at film school. and she went on to edit just about all of his films. And you know, people that you're working with now as students, you'll go on to work with. You'll come and go. Your paths might cross. 10 years might go by, and then you bump into somebody that you remember from before, and they're working on something, and they say, "Aha, you know, can you do this for me?" And that's how it works. So just be busy, I think, is the best thing.
Yeah.
It's really tough, though. It is very, very tough. I never really thought too much about where I was heading. I just kind of did the next thing, and kind of, you know, there's a motivation. You want to earn some money. You got to pay rent and things like that.
Mm.
But we didn't have children then, so we were sort of didn't have many demands on our kind of, and we could move around and things like that. So yeah, make use of that time, that early time. The first 10 years of my working career sort of were the formative years, which laid the foundation for everything else. Definitely.
Yeah. But I've got to ask before we go on to our weekly recs. What's the one thing that you wish you had known already before you started your career?
Yeah, that's a good one.
Thank you.
Well, there are two things. I'll give you the kind of the sort of top level thing that I wish I'd known.
Mm-hmm.
And I wish I'd known that it isn't a meritocracy. The industry is not a meritocracy. In other words, it's not good enough just to be really good at your job. If you take editing, for example, as well as being a really, really good editor, to be very successful, you have to have really good social skills as well. And you have to have a kind of can-do attitude. And I had most of those things, but I think early on, I was slightly naive in thinking that, you know, if I'd really worked hard on something, that automatically then I would progress. And sometimes you can kind of, if you're really good at something, people will keep getting you to do those things, and sometimes that could make it harder for you to move on. And someone once told me you should really move every 5 years into a different job or a different kind of post or whatever. And I didn't do that. I sort of stuck it out as I think I ended up being 25 years at the BBC.
Mm-hmm.
And if I'd kind of gone freelance earlier on, I could have perhaps, my path could have gone differently. You know, there are many people that I worked with at Ealing Film Studios that have gone on to be incredibly, in inverted commas, successful. I mean, I really admire their work. You know, Joe Walker, the film editor, for example, he was a peer of mine. You know, he's cut Arrival, 12 Years a Slave, Blade Runner, 2049, Hunger, Widows. You know,
wow.
So he's kind of doing okay. He might get there eventually. Wow. And other people like Colin Gowdy, who cut Star Wars Rogue One and Monsters, and Mark Day. There was a guy who was an editor when I was there. He's cut 4 out of the Harry Potter films and is currently doing Fabulous Beasts, and he's done really, really well. And all of these people, a lot more beside, they basically jumped ship, if you like. After about 10 years of working at the BBC, they went freelance. And they were able to carve their own kind of career as an individual. But the other thing I wish I'd known is I wish I'd known that I was gluten intolerant, because that could have really improved my postprandial editing speeds. Because after eating pasta for lunch or something, or sandwiches even, I used to get quite tired for a couple of hours until it sort of shook it out of my system again. So yeah. Wow. If I was known as gluten intolerant, who knows where I could have ended up.
Oh dear, you'd be on a completely different. It's what they say about branching timelines. You'd be on a completely different timeline if you'd only learned beforehand.
Yeah, it's not quite a Richard Curtis script, I don't think. I can't see it being a big blockbuster.
No. But you'll never know. You'll never know. But I've got to ask, as we often do when we close these shows, that's for a weekly rec. And when we have a guest on, we like to ask for their weekly rec. What have you got recommended for the listeners at home?
Okay, so are you talking about films?
Yeah, well, if you've got a film, if you've got more than one, even we're willing to take more than one recommendation. It's whatever you feel like is good enough to pass on to our listeners today.
Okay, so you asked if I could do this interview, and obviously there's an analogy to. I was thinking like Desert Island Discs. I was thinking, oh, maybe I could. How on earth am I going to choose one film? And then maybe I thought maybe I'm overthinking it. So I can't. I'll have to give you to get to the one suggestion. I'll have to go around the houses. Is that okay?
Yeah, that's fine. Take your time.
So one of the films that I recommend is Dark Star. And that's a science fiction film that was made on an incredibly low budget. And it was directed by John Carpenter, who I'm sure you've heard of.
Yes.
And the reason it's just such a weird film. So it's set in space. These kind of rogue people whose job it is to go around destroying planets. And there's a bomb that's got artificial intelligence, and the bomb has got a mind of its own. And at one point, without giving too much away, one of the characters has to go outside and try to reason with the bomb, and use kind of logic to kind of fool the bomb, because there's a danger that it might self-detonate. And it's very quirky. It's got some really sort of country and western music in it, and it's made by a group of really passionate filmmakers in 1974, 75, something like that. I think it had a budget of about £50,000 or something. Anyway, it's a very bizarre film. So that came to my mind, and then I thought, well, you see, everybody has films that they associate with different times in their lives. And the first feature film I ever saw at a very young age was a film which is a very strange thing to go and see, which was Where Eagles Dare. And this was released in 1968, and it's about a sort of, it's got Clint Eastwood and Richard Burton in it, and it's a kind of rescue mission to get some prisoners of war in Germany. And it was just, the music is amazing. The kind of, it's quite violent, I suppose, for a young child to watch, but it was to see it on the big screen. And I saw it at the Odeon in Lincoln, which was then, it had stalls and a circle, and it was a massive screen, and there was an interval, I think, and then you watched the next part, and yeah, amazing experience. And then, of course, films like Chitty Chitty Bang Bang and The Railway Children, Mary Poppins, all of those kind of formative films that. And now, having had children who are now grown up, they've seen all of those films as well. So, Chitty Chitty Bang Bang, Ken Hughes film, is an amazing, absolutely amazing film. And Roald Dahl wrote part of the screenplay for Chitty Chitty and things like that.
Yeah.
But then I thought, right, okay, so they would be on my list, my desert island list of films. And then later on, you've got films like Schindler's List, Spielberg. But when I was a young impressionistic person, I saw a film called Diva, and I watched that film. I watched Diva maybe 7 times, including watching it in Paris as well. It was a French film directed by Jean-Jacques Benoit. It's kind of style over substance in a way, but I was really seduced by the visual appeal of Diva. And another film around about that time called Paris, Texas.
Yeah.
Directed by Wim Wenders. And then Cinema Paradiso, Jean de Florette, quite a few foreign films. So that was really difficult to pick, because I think you tend to it's all about your visceral reaction to watching those films. But I think if I had to pick one kind of film, I might go for Paris, Texas.
Right.
1984, directed by Wim Wenders or Wim Wenders. It's a kind of archetypal, set in America. It's kind of the longings of the American myth. It's got a similarity to a film called The Searchers, and even Taxi Driver. It's a similar kind of story about a guy who is separated from his wife, and the film starts off with this guy wandering around the desert looking like he's going to, if he doesn't drink something soon, he's going to keel over. It's an unusual film. The screenplay is by Sam Shepard.
Yeah.
It stars Harry Dean Stanton and Natasha Kinski and Dean Stockwell. And the music's by Ry Cooder. And for a film that just conveys an absolute sense of place, it just draws you in. It's quite slow paced, very, very slow paced compared to a lot of films that we watch now. And it's just, for me, it's kind of one of those kind of films that stays with you a long, long time afterwards. And I bought the screenplay. There was a book you could buy which had the screenplay in it. And yeah, so Paris, Texas would be my top tip, I think.
Wow. And on this show, we also like to give real ratings out of 10, which I'm sure Corey can tell you about. But what would your real rating be for Paris, Texas out of 10, do you think?
That would be an 8.
Wow, that's strong rating, isn't it, Corey?
It's the second highest.
Yeah, second highest.
Chris Lee. Anyone to beat him?
Yeah.
I have to say, though, it was a very close thing between that and The Grinch. Because in my family, The Grinch is, we watch it over and over and over again. My sons know all of the dialogue inside out. And it's actually, The Grinch is just the most amazing film, but I can't have too many. That's the problem. To pick one, I think I'd go for Paris, Texas.
Oh, the original animation, 2D animated Grinch.
Oh, no.
Oh.
The Jim Carrey.
The Jim Carrey Grinch.
Of course, yes.
Of course, it's got to be. It's got to be the Jim Carrey Grinch. But I'm going to extend our heartfelt thank yous to you, Chris, for joining us today.
Oh, it's a pleasure. Yeah, absolute pleasure.
Thank you. And to play us out, we will be playing The Show Must Go On by Queen from Bohemian Rhapsody in 2019. Bye all.